Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. These are your two sharp needles, Gavin Rice and Jack Stanley. And in this episode, we are going to be talking about cylinders, their production, and the beginning of the molding process after the brown wax era. This is going to be a very interesting topic that we're going to talk about, and not a lot of people know after the brown wax era how the molding process really worked.
Okay, well, there we are. How you doing?
I'm good, Jack. Thank you. I'm a little tired, but I'm hanging in there. We're good.
I know. Yeah, we're getting through. And for the historic record, there's smog everywhere.
Yes, it's been
New
getting
York
hard to
City
breathe.
looks like the surface of Mars at the moment.
Yep, it's like Jupiter. In
Yeah,
Rochester, it was crazy. It was, I was breathing in smoke. There was a lot of smog and smoke. It was like I was inhaling cigarette smoke. It was it was crazy. And there was an air quality warning on
yeah.
Apple Maps, and it's crazy. It's absolutely
But
crazy.
all
But
right now,
what's
there's a
that?
bunch of forest. There's forest fires in Canada.
Canada. That's right. Yep. Yep. The wind is blowing them all towards me and, New York City and the whole East Coast. So, but on a positive note,
Yeah,
um, we can talk about cylinders. So,
sure.
if anybody is not familiar with an early cylinder, I will grab one right here. This is a brown wax cylinder. And these cylinders were produced from the late 1880s till about 1905 at the latest, maybe 1902, I want to say. But people still kind of record it on brown wax. But after the brown wax era, starting into 1902 and 1903, you have what's known as the Edison's gold molding process. Um,
Yes.
and the gold molding process, there it is, exactly. Edison gold molded records. And this process involved recording on a master cylinder, molding it around the grooves, pouring in a chemical mixture to form a cylinder. And then once it hardened, it's very similar to how we know molding today. But I'd like Jack to kind of talk about the more nitty gritty details about it, as he knows a lot more than I do about this.
It's. I confess I don't know a lot of the nitty gritty stuff, but I do know some basics about it. And one of the most important things about these early cylinders, of course, they come in so many different colors, those brown wax. Now, here's another brown wax, and you can see it's much lighter.
That's early. Yep,
They're
earlier.
yeah, they're all different. And it depends what the mixture was, how it was set up. And the interesting thing is it was kind of a soap compound.
Yep.
And it's really, if you want to talk about being green, I mean, these
Yeah.
things are definitely green. And so the interesting thing about the cylinder process is in its earliest days, you did what was called pantographic copying.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if people understand what pantographic means. It's not a word that's used that often. But if you go to a machine shop or you go to a woodworking shop, you will see a master piece of metal or wood, and you have a machine that pantographically follows the contours of that wood or metal and makes an exact copy on the other side.
Precisely.
And this is important because this starts giving us terminology, because we start using the term master.
Mm-hmm.
And we start using the pantographic method of copying. Now, one of the big problems with all of this was in the earliest days, they even tried using tubes from one machine to another to copy. And of course, they would get like 6 machines together and they'd all scream into the horns and the bands would play. But that was problematic. There really wasn't a very good solution to this until they start doing some work around 1899 1900 on creating molded cylinders. Now, what do I mean by molded cylinders? There was a chemist who worked for Edison. His name was Jonas Alsworth. And he's the guy that comes up with the formula for Edison's metallic wax cylinders. That's what they're called. And initially, they're not issued. They're used for a specific purpose. The molded cylinders, which were more difficult to make at that time, were used as the master. And brown wax copies were made from the molded cylinder. Therefore, they didn't have to have someone come in every 2 weeks to make some more brown wax cylinders to make copies from, because the molded cylinder would last much longer.
Right.
And that's also one of the reasons why you will find sometimes black wax molded cylinders from like 1901 when they weren't released until 1902.
Right.
But these were master recordings that somehow the mold stayed. But creating that mold was a monstrous problem, because here's the issue. You have to get the grooves into the record, but then you have to be able to get the record out of the damn thing. Right. And there were a myriad of various molds that existed in West Orange.
Right.
With the record still inside, because they couldn't get it out. They'd have to break the mold to get the record out. And of course, that was pretty stupid. And eventually they came up with a process of having just enough grooves to allow it to shrink just enough where it would fall out into a mitt and could be caught. And then you could start issuing your records. It's very important. It's a wonderful system that they set up, but granted, they were extremely fragile.
Exactly.
Major problem. And that's how I'd like to start here with this. And I want to let you do some talking on this, please.
Yeah. And of course, me being a brown wax recording engineer, when I want to make copies of something, I know exactly, us, both of us. When I want to make copies of something, I don't go the pantographic way. I simply have two machines that are at the exact same RPM using a stroboscope. And I connect a hose, or like a rubber hose, directly to the playing machine to a recording machine. And then you can essentially make a dub, which we can talk about in the Edison Diamond Disc era when he dubbed discs to cylinders. But talking right now, that was another method that some companies used, some private, not really well-known companies used, as that was a really effective way. But of course, unless you had both machines at the exact same RPM, which is very difficult to do considering back then, it would, one would be a little sharp or flat than the other, and it would cause speed inconsistencies. But that's just another way that people kind of did that. But Charlie Hummel is he was one of the very few people that I knew with a mold for a cylinder. Granted, it was for a doll though, for making a celluloid cylinder, but it was really interesting. It was like an aluminum mold, and the grooves are on the mold are reversed, so they stick out, which makes sense. So when you pour the chemical solution it heats and cools around the grooves, and therefore makes a really detailed copy of the recording. It's really cool.
It is. It's amazing. You know, you mentioned something. I figured I should mention this for the historic record. Many years ago, back in the 1990s, I spoke to a very old lady. She was probably around 90 years of age. And her mother was making the doll recordings for Edison, with the Edison dolls things. And it was a shelf with a machine constantly with each one, and they just go to each one and say, Mary had a little lamb as fleece as white as snow, or, row, row, row your boat, whatever it may be. But they were related to the Otts, John and Fred Ott, who were very close to Thomas Edison. And the Ott family was very involved in making those recordings. So I thought it was something I should mention here. While it's in my mind, and while you mentioned dolls, it just released that little brain cell that went floating around.
Exactly. And I feel like it's only fair to mention dictaphones, at least, because a lot of people are confused. I wanted to mention this just regardless, because I've seen some people confuse dictaphone recorders for Edison recorders, dictaphone machines for Edison machines. Dictaphone cylinders, I actually think I have one. No, this is brown wax. This is a cylinder me and Wyatt recorded. In the dictaphone era, the cylinders were, I don't want to say twice the length, but considerably longer. And the wax is softer. And you couldn't really make copies of dictaphone cylinders, which is interesting. So you would have and actually dictaphone machines, they cut 150 grooves per inch, whereas Edison 2-minute machines are 100 grooves per inch. Dictaphone is 150. Yes, Jack.
Just to mention something, the dictaphone is Columbia.
Oh, and Edaphone. That's right. Yeah.
Edaphone is, I think you're mentioning dictaphone for Edaphone.
Yes, Edaphone is 150 grooves per inch, and then 4-minute cylinders, Edison 4-minute cylinders are 200 grooves per inch, which is, it's really interesting. But as I was saying, even in the molded era, there were still cylinder recording methods that you couldn't make copies, and were still, each record a master, like Columbia is saying, so. But Jack knows a lot more about this than I do.
No, it's an interesting thing also with dictaphone, Edaphone, those recordings, and I think they were interchangeable. I'm not totally sure. I really have not. I've never used one.
Yeah, me neither.
I've seen them. I've looked at them all, but I've never used one. But I talked to lots of people who did, and they were used well into the 1960s.
Exactly. Yep.
And they were manufacturing the cylinders in West Orange at the factory until they closed in 1965, which is really amazing when you think
it is. It is. And dictaphone and Edaphone even made wire recorders, I believe. It was one of them.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
I think it was Edaphone. It's really interesting, actually.
I know that Edison, the last system they came up with, was a floppy disk kind of recorder. And they called them diamond disc. It's interesting.
That's right. Exactly.
They were red, and they just were recorded upon like a record. And you also had the dictaphone had the belt system,
right,
which you will also notice that they made well into the 60s, maybe into the 70s, because actually, if you listen to recordings of the recordings made by President Kennedy and President Johnson, those were done a lot of the times on dictaphone belts. And that's kind of an interesting thing. The Edison just kind of got swallowed up because they were purchased by the McGraw Company, became McGraw Edison. And that was pretty much the end in the 1960s to the Edison Company. I think McGraw Edison, after leaving West Orange, still produced those diamond disc kind of business machines.
Yes.
I think they went well into like the 70s.
Yep. You'd be right on that. So I'm trying to think of something worth mentioning about, yes, I wanted to talk about something also. I don't have it on me right now, but I have a standard Edison recorder, which I'm sure we've all seen. They're about the same size as a reproducer, except without the weight if it's a Model C and a Model H. But another thing to mention is how the recording process and the way the diaphragms and the recorders themselves changed in the studio recording sense. So Sean Borey actually has an original, I think it's a Columbia studio recorder, and compared to a stock, whatever recorder, the diaphragm is, I'm not kidding, compared to my head, about that big.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason for that is that it captures more detail in the low range and the mid range and a little bit of the high range, and it won't overload the groove so much because it has more flexibility. And the you actually have to, I want to talk about how it's connected to the carriage. It's not, you actually have to, there's a little bit that is shaped like a reproducer that fits into a top mounted carriage, and then it's off to the side, which is really strange because, then you lose a little bit of recording. Well, you could fit it in. I mean, because, with the carriage, there's a certain point where it stops. It just touches the edge because it doesn't want to go too close to the edge. It's kind of like I don't know how to explain it, but it's really interesting. And Sean Borey says in the original manuals, you actually have to put saliva in the connection between the rubber hose and the recorder itself to make sure that there's no air leaks or whatever, make sure it all goes into the diaphragm. It's really, really, really interesting stuff. If you can check out Sean Borey's video with Rob Scallon recording metal onto a cylinder. It was really interesting.
Yeah, he recorded some very fascinating things on
Yes, he did. He did.
But a lot of those early recorders and later ones, be they cylinder or disc, sometimes had fluid gasketing.
Yep.
Which would enhance the bass response and also hopefully reduce chatter and stuff like that, because that was one of the problems. There's something that we don't talk about too often about with acoustic recording, and that is blasting.
Right.
And blasting was a big problem, especially with lateral recording. It's less so with Hill and Dale, but still possible. But it took a little bit more effort to blast on Hill and Dale.
Right.
With lateral recording, of course, you had to keep moving back and forth from the horn to try to control that, and created some very unique situation. But the thing is that the recording studios were very complex, and you have to listen to those recordings. They're amazing.
Yes.
To those early 2-minute, well, they have a nice, good-sized groove.
Yeah, bigger groove, bigger cutter, bigger cutting stylus.
Yeah, and they make some phenomenal. Those 2-minute cylinders are remarkable sounding,
especially if they're in good condition too.
Yeah, yes, indeed. And if you listen to them played back electrically, it's pretty mind.
You can hear the reverb of the studio, which is incredible for 1902, 1903, 1904. Of course, in 1908, I believe it was, or 1907, the celluloid cylinder was introduced.
Well, not with Edison.
No, I know, Columbia. And
the indestructible. Yeah.
Right, the indestructible, which is funny, the Albany indestructible. But that also changed how the recording was done too. And I think with the celluloid cylinders, the grooves actually are a little smaller than 2-minute cylinders. And they can be played with a Model H reproducer or a Model C, preferably Model C. But you can, of course, play it with the Model H or a Diamond reproducer.
Yeah. And the other thing that's a problem with those early celluloid cylinders, they had a tendency to shrink.
Yep.
And not as noticeable on the 2-minute, but it's very noticeable on the 4-minute.
Very.
Because it shrinks and they skip.
And it won't even fit on the mandrel.
Bunch of fun stuff.
Right. It won't even fit on the mandrels, which is funny. So,
But when those things came out, you have to think of how incredible they were.
oh yeah, big time.
Didn't break. I mean, you look at a cylinder the wrong way, the thing's going to break in your hands.
Yep.
And there is that silly ass that's on some program on YouTube who's supposedly some expert who says this is a very rare cylinder and it's the only one of its kind, and he holds it like this.
Oh.
So you know that is, as they say politely, bullshit. And and so the guy drops it and he's like horrified, and it's just absolute BS.
Yeah,
But
that video was staged.
I'm sure you've seen it.
Yeah, I think it was staged.
Of course it is.
Yeah, funny. So hold your cylinders correctly. Remember, finger in. There you go, like that. Hold your cylinders correctly. We are just approaching the 20-minute mark, which of course is what YouTube allows us to do. And I would like to say thank you for everyone for checking in. Sorry about the delay. I had some technology mishaps, and we're back in the game. And I just want to let you know, Jack, my birthday is Sunday. We can maybe have a meeting, but I may not be available, but we'll see.
Whoa. Okay.
Whoa, you got too excited.
That was amazing. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. Jeez. So, thank you, everybody, for watching. Jack, I don't know if you have anything else to say, but
nonetheless, I guess I will wish you a very happy birthday.
Thank you, Jack.
And we'll talk soon, okay?
We'll see everybody in the next episode, and we may have a special guest.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.